Yo, you know what's wild? We just hit 250 years as a country. 250 years since a bunch of guys in Philadelphia looked at the most powerful empire on earth and said, nah, we're good. We'll take our chances. And this summer, while some of us were watching fireworks over the Potomac, a chunk of the loudest, most online, most educated people in this country were out there with 700-foot long printed copy of the Declaration of Independence marching through DC to tell us the whole thing was actually kind of a scam. Meanwhile, same season, protesters in Portland lit an American flag on fire outside an ICE building. Not a photo op, not a metaphor, an actual match to an actual flag on our actual 250th birthday, bro. What the? I want to talk about that tonight. Not to just be angry about it, even though I'm hella angry, but because I think something real is happening with an entire generation. And I don't think they understand what they're asking for. Let's get into it, yo.
This is the rules and cash show. Bam, bam, calling shots like a maestro. This is the rules and cash show. Where the wild and the crazy grow. Turn it up, feel the rhythm flow. Hustle, rock, bam, bam. Let's go, let's go.
I'm not going to sit here and vibe this out for you. I looked up the actual data because that's what we do on this show. Cato Institute and YouGov ran a national poll last year. Here's the headline number. 62% of Americans age 18 to 29 say they have a favorable view of socialism. 62%? That's almost 2 out of 3. Unfreaking believable. And now here's the one that should actually stop you dead in the tracks. Same poll, same age group, 34%. About 1 in 3 young Americans say they have a favorable view of communism. Oh my goodness. The ideology that depending whose county has a body count somewhere north of 100 million people in the last century alone? 1 in 3. That's not a fringe opinion anymore. Cato did the math. That's something like 18 million young people in this country who look at communism and go, yeah, I'll be into that. Yeah, that's part of what I like. And it's not just Cato. Axios ran a poll of college students last fall. 67% said they had a positive or a neutral view of the word socialism. Only 40% said that the same about capitalism. Gallup's been tracking this since 2010, and they found favorable views of capitalism among young adults cratered from 68% down into the 40s in less than a decade. What the hell is going on, yo? This isn't a couple of loud kids on a college quad with a bullhorn. This is a generational shift, and it's shown up at the ballot box. As an example, let's look at New York City. New York. Case in point, November of last year, New York City, the biggest city in the country, elects Zohran Mamdani as mayor. 34 years old, proud, self-described democratic socialist, opened his victory speech quoting Eugene Debs, a guy who ran for president 5 times as an actual Socialist Party candidate in the early 1900s. And who put him over the top? Young voters. Turnout numbers the city hasn't seen since 1969. Field polling had him winning voters under 30 by something like 57-point margin. Can you believe that? 57 points. 57 points. That's a landslide of people who came up believing the free market failed them personally. And honestly, I get why they feel that way. Rent's insane. A degree costs more than a house used to. They watched 2008 wreck their parents and COVID wreck their own 20s. But here's where I push back. Feeling screwed by the economy doesn't make communism the answer. It makes communism seductive answer. And those are 2 very different things. And let me tell you something about communism. Because I used to live in former Soviet Union. I have some experience with it. And I need you to sit with something for a second. Because I don't think enough of these kids have ever heard it from someone who actually lived it. As I said, I grew up in the former Soviet Union, country of Lithuania. Lived in the capital of Vilnius. I know what equality looks like when a government actually builds it. It looks like a standing in a line for bread, sometimes for hours, but more likely for days. My family waited on rations, actual government issued rations, because the system that was supposed to feed everyone equally couldn't reliably feed anyone. And that is a fact. That's not talking point. And that's not something I read in a pamphlet from a libertarian think tank. That's my childhood, yo. When I hear a 22-year-old with a $4,000 laptop, an iPhone, and unlimited data telling me communism just hasn't been done right yet, I don't get mad. I just get tired because it has been done over and over and over again. Soviet Union, Mao's China, Cuba, Venezuela in our own lifetime went from one of the richest countries in Latin America to a place where people were literally hunting pigeons for food and walking across a continent to escape. Same playbook every single time. Collapse the incentive to produce, and eventually you run out of things to redistribute. That is communism for you. Once you keep on taking, there won't be anybody who to take from. Nobody's gonna be left. Who you gonna take from? It's not that it's never been tried. It's that it's been tried constantly by different countries on different continents in different decades, and it produces the same lines, the same shortages, the same secret police to keep people from leaving every single time. And here's the part that gets me the most. The exact device they're using to post capitalism is theft. The phone in their hand exists because of capitalism. The venture capital that funded it. The competition between companies that made it better and cheaper every single year. The property rights that let some kid in the garage build a company big enough to put a supercomputer in your pocket. You know what doesn't produce iPhones? Central planning. You know what doesn't produce Netflix or Amazon next day delivery? Or 100 food delivery apps fighting each other for your business by getting cheaper and faster? A 5-year plan written by a committee that answers to no one. They're standing on top of the most productive economic system in human history, using tools that system built for them to tell everyone that system is the enemy. That's not activism. That's not understanding the moment you're in. Now let's talk about the flag, because this ties directly into our 250th. This year, on our actual birthday, we had two competing 250th celebrations. One run by the bipartisan commission Congress actually set up back in 2016, and one run out of White House artists pulling out of performances. A Reuters Ipsos poll finding that a majority of Americans, including half of Republicans and 3/4 of Democrats, think the whole anniversary got too political. But you know what I noticed at a lot of these protests happening around the same time? The ICE protests back in June, the No Kings marches. You see Mexican flags, Salvadoran flags, every flag except the one that belongs to this country that they're standing in. You can't tell me it's a coincidence that in Portland, on that same weekend as a No Kings rally, somebody set an American flag on fire outside the federal building right next to a Nazi flag, like they're supposed to mean the same thing. That's nonsense. That's contempt. This is the flag that flew over a country that let a broke immigrant family, like a lot of our families, build something out of nothing. The flag that represents the only system on the planet where the kid organizing the protest against capitalism can also go monetize that same protest on YouTube by dinner time. You don't get that irony in Caracas. You don't get that irony in Havana. And if you want to know where this all leads, you don't have to guess. You don't have to go back to the USSR. You just have to look at what's happening right now in the biggest city in America. 6 months into the Mamdani administration. Let's do the report card, shall we? Free buses. One of his biggest promises doesn't exist. Turns out the mayor doesn't actually control the MTA. That's a state agency. So that promise was dead on arrival. The tax hike on the wealthy to pay for all this never happened. needed Albany's approval, didn't get it. So he threatened to jack up property taxes instead when he didn't get his way, which is its own kind of tell. The rent freeze, that one's real. City Hall pushed it through, except Bill de Blasio froze rent stabilized units 3 separate times during his 8 years as a mayor. And ask any New Yorker if the city got more affordable. It didn't. It just made landlords stop maintaining buildings they can't raise rent on. That's not my opinion. That's what happens to the housing stock when you kill the incentive to invest in it. Then there's the crown jewel of all, the city-owned grocery stores. $70 million requested for 5 stores. The first one doesn't even open until 2029. $10 million just for the Bronx location alone. Whew. You know who already tried this in the United States? Kansas City in Missouri. City-owned grocery store called Sun Fresh Market. They poured $17 million into it over 10 years. Closed last year. Nobody came because a government subsidy doesn't fix crime, doesn't fix supply chains, and doesn't make people want to shop somewhere just because a mayor cut a ribbon. Even the sympathetic write-ups, people who wanted him to succeed, are calling this out. One former city official put it plainly: the whole campaign was pretty deceptive from day one, because he promised things the mayor of New York doesn't even have the power to deliver. This is the sewer socialism they're selling you, not some cleaned up Scandinavian fantasy. A mayor who can't fund his own promises, who's already scaring business owners like the guy who owns half the grocery stores in the city into talking about leaving, and whose signature economic idea already failed in Kansas City before he copied it to Manhattan. This is what it looks like in year 1. Write down what it looks like in year 4. Look, I'm not trying to say capitalism doesn't have real problems. It does. Housing is broken, healthcare is broken. I run a business myself. I see the squeeze on regular people every single day. But there is a difference, a huge difference between fixing a system and burning it down because you never had to live under alternative. I did. I stood in the lines. I know what it looks like when the state promises equality and delivers scarcity. 250 years. That flag they're burning is the reason any of us get to have this conversation out loud on camera without somebody showing up at 3 a.m. to make sure we never do it again, or we just simply disappear. Appreciate what built the phone in your hand before you use it to root for the system that would have never let you have one. That's the show, and I'm Bam Bam, and this is the Rusinkash Show. I'll see you all next time. Subscribe, like, and comment below. And always remember that God loves you.
Catch the wave, let your dreams ignite. In the world of business, reach new heights. Join the journey, hear the words unfold. Bam Bam's vision, turning stories to gold.